Welcome to Speaking the Truth with your host, Anthony Brown, a podcast where you dive deep into the system that shapes us, the stories that define us, and the power of radical truth telling. Speaking the Truth is brought to you by Associates Life Coaching and Counseling. If you're feeling blue and don't know what to do, call Anthony Brown, who will help you on 1-800-217-7140. Speaking the Truth is also brought to you by Leo Publications. Leo Publications publishes several of my books. This is my publishing company, and we offer a variety of services: ghostwriting, editing, things of that nature. Go to QueenLeoBrown.com to see some of the publications that I have, and some other books that I have. All this brought to you by Brown Group of Maryland. Speaking Truth, Brown Leo Publications, and Social Life Coaching and Counseling is a subsidiary of Brown Group of Maryland. Today's episode is personal, it's raw, and it's necessary because I'm talking about depression, how it's shaped by patriarchy, lies, and racism, and how we can overcome it through truth, therapy, spirituality, community, and reclaiming our authentic selves. This episode also marks a special announcement, which is I'm working on a new book titled, Depression. It's political, cultural, and systemic. A journey to healing from patriarchy, lies, and living authentic. So let me take you on a journey through the themes of that book, and I promise if you ever felt broken, invisible, or like joy was out of reach, this is for you. Let's begin with a truth that doesn't get said enough. Depression is not just personal. It's political, it's cultural, it's systemic, and for too long, we've talked about mental health like it's something wrong with you, with your brain, your choices, your lifestyle. But what if depression is also a logical response to living in a world that gaslights you, limits you, and lies to you? In my new book, I call this, which I previously said, depression is political, cultural, and systemic. Women are told to smile through pain, and that's my first chapter in this particular book, where I talk about women. Men are told not to cry. Black people are told to be twice as good for half the credit. And we are told to fake it till we make it. And then wonder why we're exhausted, anxious, and empty. Patriarchy tells women to serve, to submit, to sacrifice. It punishes truth and rewards performance. It keeps us in roles that shrink our spirits, whether it's the good wife, the strong Black woman, or the silent daughter. But what happens when you suppress your truth for too long, you get sick, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. And men who suffer too, patriarchy tells us to be strong, not soft, to conquer, not connect, to endure in silence, but silence can kill. Depression in men, especially Black men, is undiagnosed and untreated. We need a new way of being, a way that allows us to feel, to heal, and to be fully human.
How we conceptualize depression has changed in the past decade. In 2019, what do we think causes it? That's what I'm talking about today. I'm Dr. Tracy Marks, a psychiatrist, and this channel is about mental health education and self-improvement. If you don't want to miss a video, click subscribe and the notification bell. The traditional way we approach the cause and treatment of depression was to see it as a chemical imbalance. That is, you have insufficient amounts of the neurotransmitters serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And low levels of these brain chemicals are what was causing your depression. We treat the depression by replenishing these chemicals using antidepressant medications. that help the brain cells or the neurons either produce more of the chemicals or stop the chemicals from being broken down after they're produced so that they hang around a little bit longer. And that's the concept behind the SSRIs, or the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That concept is now so 2000. It's not that we don't believe that these brain chemicals are in balance. It's just that as research has advanced, we have a different understanding of how they become imbalanced. And the studies that support this use functional MRIs, genetic biomarkers, dissecting the brains of deceased people called post-mortem studies, and looking at the brains of mice. Mice, like other animals, get depressed too. I'm telling you this in case you are someone who wants to know what's the proof of this. And I have references in the description, and look at the methods section to see how they measure the neurotransmitter levels and how they detected changes in the neurons. So now we see depression as caused by abnormal connections between the neurons, and this involves the concept of neuroplasticity. When cells don't connect properly, you get abnormal production of the brain chemicals.
What?
Hold on, stick with me here. Neuroplasticity is the process of the brain remodeling itself over time as we learn new things. Think of your brain as like your computer's central processing unit that functions through a complex circuit. The circuit is made up of neurons, which are nerve cells. As you learn new things, new circuit paths are formed and old unused paths disappear. These paths are just simply the nerve cells connecting to one another. The cells communicate by secreting chemicals. These neurotransmitters become the way that the cells transmit information. Donald Hebb was a psychologist who developed the theory called Hebbian theory of how nerve cells function in the brain. A catchphrase of his theory is that neurons that fire together wire together, and neurons that fire out of sync fail to link. So how does this relate to depression? With depression, there's a disconnect between certain neural circuits, and these circuits, by the way, are mostly in the prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus. And these are the areas of the brain that regulate mood and information processing. So instead of the neurons firing together, the circuit chain is broken and you don't get the transmission of the chemicals. It's like negative neuroplasticity. The circuit link is broken, and this is where you get the inadequate amounts of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So this is what we see happening, but we don't know exactly what makes this happen. But we do believe that there is more of an environmental influence, like stressful life events, that makes it happen. So it's not just due to something inborn. What happens to you as you go along your life can disrupt these circuits. Why should you care about this? Because it affects how we treat depression in the future. Our current antidepressant medications are good, but according to the STAR-D study, which was a sentinel study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, a third of people did not respond to multiple medication trials. So treatment-resistant depression is a big problem. So when it comes to treating depression, we're missing something. Even in the comments on this channel, I see many people talk about how they took medication for years with no success. So now the newer drugs being studied address preventing the disruption of the circuits. And this focus actually addresses the problem instead of the consequence. Low serotonin is the consequence, not the cause. It's like having a bleeding wound. You can get something to replace the blood that you've lost, or you can close up the wound that's causing the bleeding. The new medication focus is closing the wound instead of replacing the blood. And we hope this new focus is better. But another way this is a big deal is that we have a better understanding of how the psychotherapies, like mindfulness, really improve depression. Mindfulness has been shown to enhance neuroplasticity and improve the connections in the circuits. So it's a non-medication option that has real promise. I'll have an upcoming video on the topic of mindfulness and neuroplasticity, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Talk to me in the comments. I love hearing from you. And see you next time.
Okay, so that's a good read. I believe she's a psychiatrist, and she talks about depression in terms of from a medical standpoint. Um, and so what she's saying is that depression is not caused by it's is a result of real life happening, of real life things taking place. So it's not caused by there's different schools of thought about there has been different schools of thought about depression, and one has been that depression it can be a chemical imbalance. And then, but there's another study I want to show you by Dr. Joy, which talks about depression being genetic. Um, you may have heard this, or you may not have, that, for example, this is not depression, this is another mental health disease. A kid that's ADHD, there's a theory that ADHD is caused by a mom who experiences trauma during her pregnancy, and she passes down ADHD to her child. So there's something called post-traumatic slave syndrome that Dr. Joy has coined, and this particular syndrome, depression is or other mental health diseases is passed down genetically from your forefathers, your ancestors' trauma. So what's happening is, if assuming that's correct, that trauma is, and I'm off script right now because I always have to have a script when I'm doing something. So I'm saying this from what I've studied and from the top of my head from what I've studied. What trauma, along with real life experiences, the result of that is depression. So this gives you so knowing this helps you to deal with the situation. Now she talked about mindfulness, and so therapy on top of mindfulness, which is a therapeutic approach. Therapy, CBT is what most therapists use. Can be used as well, or you can use medications as well. But it's, in my opinion, a lot of therapists' opinion, if you use medication, unless you have a mood disorder like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, those are mood disorders. Unless you have a mood disorder, you can choose not to use medication. But sometimes you can be so depressed you need medication so you can process what's going on with you, or you can respond. Yeah, so you can respond to therapy by temporarily using medication. But medication for clinical depression is meant as a temporary and not something that's permanent. So in some cases it may have to be permanent, but in most people I would say that it doesn't have to be permanent. So I wanted to show you, and I just thought I'm just adding this at the last minute, Dr. Joy's video, because I want to really explain post-traumatic slave syndrome. Let's see if I can cue this up right quick.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes. So 300 years of trauma, no help, freed, no help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful. Oh, he just works my nerve. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody black knows that even though the black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, you know, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder because that becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. You know, all of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were, African American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, you know, finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being black? How does factoring in being black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it because you see it habitual. You socialize. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
All right. That was excellent. That was excellent. Good explanation to it. To understand how trauma can be cultural as well. So racism is, let's speak plainly, racism causes depression. Living in a system that questions your worth, criminalizes your existence, and denies your history takes a toll. Every microaggression, every denied opportunity, every false narrative, it adds up. For Black people, we found ways to survive. We created joy in the cracks. We've held onto church, community, music, and celebration, not as a denial of pain, but as a declaration of dignity. And from being from the South, from Texas, Southeast Texas, some people say that's not part of the South, but I believe it is. If we don't do anything right, we know how to celebrate, especially during times, hard times, especially during difficult times. A lot of people have been making comments like during these particular times where things aren't right politically, things aren't right, uh, or things are daunting financially, and even maybe fears of things that's going around the world, the wars, rumors of wars. In spite of all that, we celebrate. So in the book that I'm writing, I dedicate an entire section to what I call dancing through the storm, because to laugh, to sing, and to praise in the midst of injustice, that's a radical act. So telling the truth to heal. One of the core messages in breaking the chains is this: lying breeds depression. Truth makes healing possible. When we lie to ourselves about what hurts, we stay stuck. When we lie to others about who we are, we become strangers to ourselves. But when we speak truth, even when it shakes us, we begin to heal. Truth might cost you approval, but it will buy you peace. Now, in this next video I want to show or want to play, this particular doctor, I really kind of feel he's talking to other mental health professionals, but it's on YouTube for people to understand depression. He goes in deep, and I'm probably stopping along the way to kind of explain some things, but he goes deep into it, but towards the end of it. So if you listen to, just bear with me and listen to the whole segment of it. At the end, you will get, and I'll explain it, the truth piece of living authentically, of being honest, and how that heals depression.
The first thing I would say is that if you're dealing with someone who's depressed and they're really depressed, you should try giving them antidepressants. Because if they die, you can't help them. Okay, so if you're suffering, you are obligated.
And that's the piece I was talking about in terms of when a person is extremely depressed, they need medication sometimes, or if you do, you need medication sometimes to just be able to be stable enough so that you can process. And so a psychiatrist is a person that manages medication, but other than psychiatry, you need a therapist to help you manage your emotions. So you need both.
Obligated, in a sense, to hold on to whatever rope someone throws you. And one of the things I do with my clients all the time, especially if they're really in trouble, is to tell them, look, I don't know exactly what's going to help you, but don't arbitrarily throw out any possibilities, because you might not have that luxury. Antidepressants help a lot of people, and there are technical reasons why that's the case. So that's a simple answer. It's not relevant to what I already described, except that if you're offered a gift by your society and it works, try it. I don't care what your presuppositions are. Apart from that, lots of the time you see people who are suffering with depression, for example. There's a multitude of reasons, but I'll take one common reason. You could think about it as associated with the story of Peter Pan. Now, Peter Pan is someone who won't grow up, right? Now, the problem with Peter Pan is he gets to be king, but it's king of Neverland. Neverland doesn't exist. So being king of nothing isn't that helpful. Well, one of the things that you often see with people who suffer from depression, and I'm not making a blanket statement about the cause of depression because there's lots of them, is that people who don't have enough order in their life tend to get overwhelmed. So, for example, if someone comes into me and to see me and they say they're depressed, I always ask them a very standard set of questions. Do you have a job? If you don't have a job, you're really in trouble in our society. First of all, your biological rhythms tend to go off the rails right away because there's no reason to go to bed at any particular time and there's no reason to get up. And for many people, if they don't get up at the same time, they foul up the functioning of their circadian rhythms, and that's enough to make them depressed right off the bat.
Okay, so what he's talking about here is that in life, we all have a certain level of anxiety. And some anxiety at certain levels is good for us. For example, the anxiety when an alarm clock goes off, I got to get up, get ready, go to work, and be on time. That's a healthy type of anxiety. So we need a certain level of anxiety so we can just function in Earth. Sometimes cooking a meal can be anxiety on a certain small level. So they're always driving to work safely. That's a certain level of anxiety, but it's a healthy anxiety. So we need this anxiety on a certain level so we can function and be safe and be productive in the life that we live in.
The bat, especially if they start napping during the afternoon. They don't have a purpose. People aren't good without a purpose. And this isn't hypothesizing. We absolutely understand the circuitry that underlies positive emotion. We know how it works. Almost all the positive emotion that any of you are likely to experience in your life will not be a consequence of attaining things. It will be a consequence of seeing that things are working as you proceed towards a goal you value. That's completely different. And you need to know this because people are often stunned, for example, they finish their PhD thesis and their presupposition is that they're going to be elated for a month. And often instead they're actually depressed and they think, what the hell, I've been working on this for 7 years and I handed it in and what do I do now? And that's what depresses them, right? It's the what do I do now? Well, they're fine if they enjoyed it, pursuing the thing, as long as it was working out, they get a lot of enthusiasm and excitement out of that because that's how our nervous systems work. Most of your positive emotion is goal pursuit emotion. If you take drugs like cocaine or amphetamine, the reason they're enjoyable is because they turn on the systems that help you pursue goals. That's why people like them. So if you don't have a job, you got no structure, that's not good. Plus, you tend not to have a point. So you're overwhelmed by a chaotic lack of structure and you don't have any positive emotion. Well, do you have any friends? So sometimes you see people who are depressed, they have no job, they have no friends, they have no intimate relationship, they have an additional health problem, and they have a drug and alcohol problem. My experience has been if you have 3 of those problems, it's almost impossible to help you. You're so deeply mired in chaos that you can't get out because you make progress on one front and one of your other problems pulls you down. So one of the things I tell people who are depressed is like, don't sacrifice your stability. Get a job, even if it's not the job you exactly want. Get a damn job. You need a job. Find some friends. Get out in the dating circuit. See if you can establish an intimate relationship. Put together some of the foundational items that are like pillars that your life rests on. Well, that's the practical thing to do. So that's one example with regards to depression. Well, the thing is, you don't just launch it on them, you got to negotiate with the person. And you also got to teach them to negotiate with themselves. And this is something that's very useful to know. You can tyrannize yourself into doing things, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I would recommend instead is that you ask yourself what you're willing to do. It's a really effective technique. It's like a meditative technique. So, for example, you can get up in the morning and you can think, well, I'd like to have a good day today, so I'd like to go to bed tonight without feeling guilty because I, didn't do some things I said I was going to do, and I'd like to have kind of an interesting day. So you got to fulfill my responsibilities, and I want to, enjoy the day. Then you can ask yourself, well, okay, what would I?
So what he's talking to, and that's why I think he's talking to a group of therapists. He's talking about a therapeutic approach of how to treat people with depression. And there are many different methods. One method that I have a certification is called solution-focused brief therapy. And in solution-focused brief therapy, you don't talk about the problem. You talk about how it looks to live if the problem doesn't exist. Or when I felt my best, to remind the person of how they felt. And so the science behind it is by putting the person in the mindset of how it feels when the problem doesn't exist or is resolved, you have your body creates markers to help you figure out how to get to point A to point B. So that's just a little side. That's something for free. All right.
What I have to do in order for that to happen that I would do. And the probability, if you practice this for 3 or 4 days, is your brain will just tell you, it'll say, well, you know, there's that piece of homework that you haven't done for like 3 weeks. You should knock that sucker off because it would only take you 10 minutes and you've been avoiding it and torturing yourself to death for, you know, like 72 hours straight. And if you do that, here's a little interesting thing you can do. And, you know, maybe this is a little obligation you should clean up. And so what you do in a situation like that is you teach the person to negotiate with themselves. Say, well, let's figure out what your aims are. You got to have some aims, whatever they are. And they might say, well, I'm so depressed I don't have any aims. And then I say, well, pick the least objectionable of the aims and act it out for a while and see what happens. Because sometimes your emotional systems are so fouled up that you have to pretend, you have to act the thing out before you can start to believe it. I mean, people always assume they have to believe and then act, but sometimes that's true and lots of times it isn't. So the trick.
And that's solution focus, what he's talking about, even though I don't feel that he's teaching solution focus, that's a solution focus concept.
If you're doing therapeutic work with someone and you're helping them establish a structure, is to find out what they'll do. Now, if they want to get better, which is not a given, because there are often payoffs for not getting better. That's basically the payoffs of being a martyr, or maybe the payoffs of doing what your entirely pathological family members want you to do because they actually want you to fail. Assuming you want to get better, there's usually something you can figure out that would constitute a step towards some sort of concrete goal. And my presumption, it's a behavioral presumption fundamentally, is that small accruing gains that repeat are unbelievably powerful. So, you know, this is another thing to know about in your own life. It's something I learned in part from reading the writings of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who's a great Russian philosopher and novelist. You know, he said, you can look at your life and you can see what isn't right about it. I mean, all you have to do is look. And then you can start to fix that. And the way you fix it is by noticing what you could, in fact, fix. You know, people are often trying to fix things they can't fix, which I would not recommend, because if you try to fix something you can't fix, you'll just ruin it. Like, you can find all sorts of undergraduates who are perfectly willing to restructure the international economic system, who cannot keep their room clean. And there's actually a gap there, you know, and it's surprising that people don't actually notice. So I would say, if you pay attention, you can see things that you could fix. They yell at you. They really do. We even know how that happens. Let me give you an example, because rooms are full of stories, and the stories have effects on you. So here's a classic experiment. So you take 2 groups of undergraduates, you bring them into your lab, and you give one group a multiple choice test that has a bunch of words in it that are associated with being old. And you give the other group the same multiple choice test, except the words are associated with being young. This is independent of the content of the test. It's just descriptions. And then you time the undergraduates as they walk back to the elevators. The ones who completed the multiple choice test that had more words associated with aging walk slower back to the elevators. And they don't know that. And they don't know they're doing it. And that study's been replicated in various forms many, many times. You're unbelievably sensitive to the story that your environment's telling you. Because your environment is not made out of objects. That's just wrong. Your environment is basically made out of something like tools and obstacles. You're a tool-using creature. You're a tool-perceiving creature. The things you... Like, if I take you out of this room and I say, well, what was the room? You're not going to say, you know, random patterns in the carpet, because they're real. They're just as good an object as anything else. You're going to say chairs because you can sit on them, and you're going to say handrails because you can hold them. You're going to say stairs because you can walk down them. That's what you see, and that's what you interact with. And if you pay attention to your environment, which is you, by the way, extended, all of your experience is you. It will tell you all the time what you should do. All you have to do is do it. But then you have to decide if you want to do it. One of the things I've noticed about people, because I've wondered, once I started studying these mythological stories, and I got this idea about the fact that life can be meaningful enough to justify its suffering. I thought, God, that's such a good idea. Because it's not optimistic exactly. You know, some people will tell you, well, you can be happy. It's like, those people are idiots. I'm telling you, they're idiots. There's going to be things that come along that flatten you so hard you won't believe it. And you're not happy then. And so if life is to be happy, well, in those situations, what are you doing? Why even live? But life isn't to be happy. If you're happy, you're bloody fortunate, and you should enjoy it. You should, because it's the grace of God, so to speak. With regards to meaning, I thought, well, people know when they're doing something meaningful. They can tell. So why the hell don't they do meaningful things all the time? It seems obvious. You could do it. I mean, it's hard. you know, because other people want you to do other things, and it's a struggle, but everything's a struggle. And then I thought, well, oh, I get it. I see why. It took me about 10 years to figure this out. People have a choice. Choice number one, nothing you do means anything. Well, that's kind of a drag, right? It's meaninglessness of life and all that existential angst. You know, that's kind of a pain. But the upside of nothing that you do is meaningful is you don't have to do anything. You've got no responsibility. Now, you have to suffer because things are meaningless, but that's a small price to pay for being able to be completely useless. The alternative is everything you do matters. Really. If you make a mistake, it's a real mistake. If you betray someone, you tilt the world a little more sharply towards evil rather than good. It matters what you do. Well, if you buy that, then you can have a meaningful life. But there's no mucking around. It means responsibility. It means that the decisions you make are important. It means that when you do something wrong, it's wrong. Well, do you want that?
Okay, so that part is what I'm getting at is that when you live a meaningful life, living a meaningful life means being honest with yourself. You cannot live a meaningful life if you're not honest with yourself or yourself. If you live in a lie or lying to yourself about who you are at the core, and give this facade, then that in itself will cause depression if you live in a lie. If you're honest with yourself and intentionally find meaning in everything that you do, and there's many different ways of doing that, and living life to the fullest. And living life to the fullest is being connected to community, being connected to organizations, being connected to friends, being connected to family, being connected to, if you are a religious person, being connected to faith-based, but it doesn't take that. Being connected to nature, going outside, exercising, having a pet. Not that you have to have a pet, but being connected to nature in some type of way, being civically rather responsible, participating in things that make the world a better place, politics, PTA, or other organizations. These are the things that help you to be happy. If there's a phrase that says "No man is an island," we are not meant to live on this world alone. And it's okay to be an introvert, but you can't be a total introvert to be healthy. You have to come out your comfort zone and force yourself to be amongst people on some level. So that's enough. So get off that soapbox. Let me continue. What can we do to heal? So in my book that I'm writing, it's about naming pain. It's about offering hope. So here's some of the healing practices that I'm going to explore, or I'm exploring. Therapy. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's like having a coach. Every sports player have a coach. Every millionaire or billionaire have a mentor. It's wisdom. Spirituality, whether through prayer, meditation, or sacred silence. Sometimes you have to sit down and shut up and listen, whether it's nature, whether it's the environment, whether it's listening to your inner voice, whether it's listening to higher power. Sacred silence is important. And sacred silence is not always connected to religion. If you're not a religious person, it's not always connected to religion. It's sitting down and listening to your inner voice. Positive relationships. Surround yourself with people who see the real you. Now, there's what's the name of that theory? Johari's window. So in Johari's window, there are 4 parts of who we are. The part of us that we see and everybody sees. The part that's unconscious to us, but everybody sees, that everybody sees, but we don't see about ourselves, whether it's true or not. uh, and the part that we see, but we don't let anybody see. We hide that part of us. And the other part, which I say is either it can be dangerous or it can be a unknown talent that we have. The part that we see and no one sees. So look up Johari's window when you get a chance, and it's fascinating about it's a theory about 4 parts of who we are. Community, belonging, join something bigger than yourself. Nature, go outside, touch the earth, reclaim your rhythm. Movement, not just exercise, but dance, walk, breathe, feel. Nutrition, what you eat feeds your mind, not just your body. Celebration, this is important, especially in these times. Create joy on purpose. Reclaim your smile. Healing is not a straight line, it's a sacred circle. And you are worthy of walking in it. You're worthy of walking in it. You're worthy of walking in it. So, in this episode, I talked a lot about racism. I talked a lot about because that's from the experience that I live as a Black male, a male of African descent living in the United States that is rooted into racism. So, but this is not just for Black folks, this episode. So a word to my white listeners and viewers. My book also speaks to white readers. And this episode, I just said that. Because dismantling racism is not just Black people's work. If your ancestors built the system, you have a role to unbuilding it. I include a chapter for white people that asks hard but healing questions. How do you benefit from a system you didn't create? How can you use your privilege to repair the harm? This is not about guilt, it's about responsibility. And if you're listening, you're already on the path. You made it this point, you're already on that path. So, some of my final thoughts. So this is what I want you to know. If you ever felt broken, you're not beyond repair. If you ever felt unseen, you're not invisible. If you ever felt unworthy, you are enough. So my book, Depression, is political, cultural, and systemic. A journey to healing for patriarchy, lies, and living authentically is coming soon. Probably before the end of the summer, probably sometime in July, maybe August. But I'll let you know when it's out. It's not just a book, it's a mirror, a companion, and a call to courage. So stay tuned for updates, release dates, and how to pre-order. And if this episode spoke to you, share it, subscribe, give me a thumbs up. I don't say that enough. Start the conversation. Speak the truth. Because healing is contagious and it starts with you. You have been listening and looking at Speaking the Truth. Your host, Anthony Brown. Till you hear my voice again, be well.
Wow.